Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nordic Pavilion and to this Nordic Talks session, which will focus on green and livable cities in Africa, focusing on how innovative urban development can unlock sustainable economic recovery. And this event is hosted by the Nordic Development Fund in close collaboration and partnership with African Development Bank. My name is Henrik Franklin. I'm Director for Portfolio Origination and Management at the Nordic Development Fund, NDF in short, and I'm pleased to moderate this session today. For those of you that don't know, NDF is the joint Nordic international finance institution focusing on the nexus between climate change and development in lower income countries and countries with fragile situations. And to set the stage, we're going to watch a short, I think 1 minute video on the Nordic Talks. So, let's begin talking. Let me first welcome and introduce Mary Gestrin, who will give some opening remarks to us. And as a background, Ms. Gestrin is the Head of Communications for the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Council since 2015. In that capacity, she was also, she was advisor to many Nordic ministers and parliamentarians. Before this role, she worked for the Finnish National Public Broadcast Service, Yle. She holds an MBA from Aalto University in Finland. Ms. Gestrin, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. Africa is in a process of rapid urbanization, and lack of time and money has made change a huge challenge. But challenges can be turned into opportunities. Well-planned, people-centered investments that take climate impact into consideration can bring economic growth, create new services, open up jobs for youth, and overall unlock a possibility for green recovery and more livable cities. Nordic cities can be of an inspiration. On global indices for sustainability and livability, Nordic cities tended to score very high. In the overview of the most sustainable European cities for 2021, both Oslo, Copenhagen and Stockholm are in the top 10. When looking at family life, Helsinki in Finland was found to be the top city in 2020. I'm very much looking forward to this interesting event and hoping that the ideas and results that have been successful in the Nordic countries can be inspirational catalysts for both city officials, politicians, and businesses in Africa.
Thank you, Ms. Gestrin. So with those opening remarks setting the stage, just so you know, we'll have, during this session, we'll have representatives from two cities, Kisumu in Africa, Reykjavik in Iceland, and both have very different contexts and situations, but both of them have put green solutions as part of the heart of their development planning at the city level. We will also hear how Nordic solutions have inspired cities in both Latin America and other parts of Africa. So we will soon engage with this distinguished panel, and I will introduce each one of them as I give them the floor during the conversation. But to kick off, let me just put a few more statistics and information on the table. First of all, urban transition, which is characterized by having the majority of the population living in cities and towns, is gaining greater momentum in Africa than any other part of the world. In fact, according to the OECD, Africa's population is expected to double by 2030 to 2.5 billion people, and an additional 950 million people are expected to move or live in cities. And 17 out of the 20 fastest growing cities in the world many of them secondary cities, are in Africa. So urbanization is at the heart of Africa's structural transformation, and this has both opportunities and challenges, also considering climate change. So NDF supports development of sustainable and resilient cities across the world in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in doing so, we always try to look, where possible, where there could be Nordic solutions that can be applied as relevant. For example, in Latin America, we've partnered with the Inter-American Development Bank on an initiative called Emerging and Sustainable Cities, where recently a delegation of Latin American and Caribbean city representatives visited 2 cities, Copenhagen and Malmö, to share experiences and learn from that. We've also partnered with the African Development Bank on the Urban and Municipal Development Fund, which supports cities on municipal finance, city and transport, looking at Nordic solutions for inspiration. And the Nordic Development Fund has also invested in different cities across Africa on green solutions, including Kigali, Senegal, Dar es Salaam, including nature-based solutions for things like flood control and wastewater management. And coming back to the Nordic Council of Ministers, a few years back, they financed an initiative together with researchers and practitioners to look at Nordic sustainable cities solutions. And the outcome was a catalog of different solutions that link to Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And although Nordic cities have surely met a lot of the challenges and found good solutions, there will be many challenges coming up in the near term, including climate change. And African cities are finding ways to adapt to a changing climate, and with an increasing urbanization, decision makers like our professor here is looking for different solutions that can be applied, and possibly the Nordic experiences and solutions can provide some inspiration to the work that you're doing, Professor. So in understanding different urban realities, both in Nordic context, African context, we think can help mayors like yourselves to develop different solutions and co-create and learn together. So that's really the focus of this discussion, to learn from each other. And with that, let me now turn to the distinguished panel to share some of the experiences and perspectives that you have on promoting green and livable cities. So let me start with you, the governor of Kisumu County in Kenya, Professor Anyang Nyong'o, to please describe Kisumu's vision of a green and livable city and the current efforts your administration is doing to promote this. But let me first give you, give the audience an introduction of who you are. Professor, you've been a member of parliament of the Kisumu rural constituency for 20 years, and you became Kisumu's county's first senator in 2013. Professor has twice been cabinet minister in the Kenyan government. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Chicago and has taught at the University of Nairobi, El Colegio de Mexico, and Addis Ababa University, and has also been the head of programs of the African Society of Sciences, or Academy of Sciences, sorry. And he has published several books and articles on political economy and economic development in Africa. So quite a trajectory. So Honorable Professor, over to you.
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank you for inviting us here today to discuss this very important topic. And let me begin by the comment that were made earlier that challenges can create opportunities. As you know, we've just gone through, or we are still going through, the COVID-19 crisis. And during the COVID-19 crisis, we did things we didn't expect to do before. The idea that there were no vaccines around and you had to get them, the idea that we found out that people were living crowded in places and markets were crowded and needed to create space, this really led to a lot of innovation everywhere, including Africa. Now, when it comes to the issue of urbanization, as you have said, more and more people are moving to urban centers and towns, and it is estimated that by 2050, over 50% of Africans will be living in urban areas. But we have not always planned properly for urban living. As you know, urban areas are bedeviled by poverty, squalor, and a kind of a separation between the poor and the rich in terms of living areas. You have what are called slums or squatters or informal sector. There is no God-given reason why urban areas should be divided thus. But this is the heritage we have, and this is the heritage that endangers our future Because during the recent floods that have occurred as a result of global warming, for example, the level of Lake Victoria rose, and we in Kisumu who live on the top of the Gulf of Lake Victoria, we experienced a lot of losses. Homes and pastures and businesses and hotels and resorts that were near the lake were swallowed or swept away. This required the relocation of people and the relocation of business, which cost a lot of money, and we have not completed that process yet. This means that what has been being discussed here at this meeting about adaptation and establishing an adaptation fund to mitigate global warming or climate change is extremely important to us. And we think that some of the initiatives we've already taken in collaboration with the national organization, the UN system, the Nordic countries for that matter, about climate-led agriculture or climate-sensitive initiatives in cities and towns must be intensified and upscaled. We think that this can be done through more intense discussions and exchange of ideas. For that matter, next year, in the month of May, from May 17th and 21st, we shall be holding the 9th edition of AfriCities in Kisumu. AfriCities is the getting together of local government and cities of Africa, UCLGA, every 3 years to discuss important issues pertaining to local governments and cities. One of the things pertaining to local governments and cities that we face it now is global warming. And therefore, the theme for AfriCities next year in Kisumu as an intermediary city is how intermediary cities, which will be metropolises of the future, can deal with issues of global warming or climate change by better planning of urban living, by ensuring that urban living is sustainable, not only in terms of people's survival, but in the terms of survival of nature itself. You realize that we have been living more and more in concrete jungles, and we must thank Nordic countries. You set a good example of doing away or limiting concrete jungles by making sure that the green space is also present. Now, we are now planning actually in Kisumu. We have been working very closely with the Habitat. And we have already done geophysical planning for our city. And we now know by planning that we can determine who lives where and how, and what kind of infrastructure we need in terms of sewage, water provision, transport, and so on, so that Kisumu of the future in 2050, when it is a metropolis perhaps of 2 million people, now it is 800,000 people, will be sustainable. That means that there must also be resources for doing this. And in that area, it is for us first and foremost, as a city and as a nation, to budget properly for urban growth and urban development, do certain things today which are harming the environment. For example, one of the things we have been discussing here and with which we are working closely with the Habitat is relying more and more on electrical energy rather than fossil-based energy, which are dangerous to global warming. And that will also cost money because the motorbike, for example, is a major means of transport in urban areas in Kenya. Yet the motorbike is one of the biggest polluters. One motorbike, 250cc, can give carbon emission worth 1 10-ton lorry. And we have so many of them because they are accessible to the people, they are cheap and so on. But in the end, they are not that cheap. If we continue relying on gasoline as a major means of propelling the motorbikes, changing that to electrical power costs money and also needs technology. So we must train ourselves and invest in that process. And those are some of the things why we need this kind of adaptation fund, which realize what the third world can do and urban centers can do in the third world as we change from carbon emission to clear energy that can make us sustainable in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor, for sharing those very inspiring words, and congratulations for being selected to host the event next year. I'm sure it wasn't a chance. It was really based on your strong work and track record. So we wish you luck with that, and we look forward to hearing from that. And one thing I hear from you is the importance of having this long-term vision. You mentioned 2050, but also having very concrete, actionable things on the ground in terms of green spaces, having more sustainable transport solutions, for example. So yeah, we'll come back towards the end of the panel. I'm going to ask all the panelists to give one concrete sort of takeaway, but we'll come back to that or action for the future. But now over to you, Mr. Eggertsson, Dagur Eggertsson, who's the mayor of the city of Reykjavik in Iceland, which you've been since 2014, and you also had that same position before, from 2007 to 2008. So thanks for joining us. Mr. Eggertsson is both a physician, from what I understand, and a human rights and international lawyer from the University of Lund in Sweden. You've worked more than 20 years in the number of executive positions in the Reykjavik government, also as head of city planning. So yeah, similar to the professor, Mr. Eggertsson, if you can please share your city's vision and what you've been doing, and yeah, how you've been promoting green and livable cities. Thank you.
Well, first, I'm honored to be in this panel with no special knowledge of the topic, really, but maybe some insights from Reykjavik. It's easily forgotten that only 100 years ago, Reykjavik was probably the poorest city, and Iceland the poorest country in Europe. And when we think about what happened, because now we have quite good wealth per capita, we are very few, I have to admit. We are only 350,000, but per capita we are scoring quite good. And one of the strong reasons for that, in my opinion, is very fast urbanization. Iceland urbanized faster than any other country in Europe that I know of. And I think this is something urbanization is often talked about as a negative thing. It's not. Cities are places where people kind of share things with each other, do business, and do a lot of great things that they didn't know existed. So urbanization is one. We burnt coal and wood and whatever. The first part of that history, although we were sitting on geothermal energy. Reykjavik in Icelandic, Reik means steam or smoke, because we had warm water under our feet. But we didn't really have the means or capita to use it. We used it small scale to wash our clothes. Mostly the women did that, actually. But slowly but surely we hooked every house and every business up to central heating, warm water, which also can be used for cooling if you use the technique. And it was in the oil crisis of the 70s when kind of the leap of faith was, that step was taken. It was very capital intensive, but then every household in Reykjavik was hooked up to central heating. And it's still the lowest electricity bills probably in any city in the world. And I want to stress this, not because geothermal is existing in all parts of Africa, but in Kenya and Eastern Africa, it certainly is, to a large extent. What we needed was external funds, capital, good loans, very patient loans for infrastructure that is essentially local. And it was a locally city-owned company that did the things and still holds on to the infrastructure and still keeps the electricity and heating bills low. So I think that is something to think about, that when you look at the price of kind of housing, where you add on housing prices and electricity and heating prices, Reykjavik is very low and very cheap relatively. And then you can think, maybe your inner voice is saying, okay, yeah, this is Scandinavia, this is Iceland, we can't do this in all of the world. But if we think again and go just historically to the numbers, the GDP of the Scandinavian countries were very close to the average of Africa in '72. Norway and Iceland were very close under Namibia, a bit over Egypt now. So, I mean, it's kind of, I think that with capital investment, you are at a stage of urbanization where you can build on good plans, as you are doing, invest in the future, and I think that is one of the keys to take out of COP this year, is that we don't only need transition, we need just transition, and I think that the key of getting people with us is that they see that in the green investments we are doing, they see a good, healthy future with I mean, the private economy doing fine as well as the economy in general, and so I believe in large, brave, future-looking green investments that are local and locally owned, but I think the capital has to come from different sources.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was really interesting historical perspective to see.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, the trajectory of Reykjavik and Iceland, and making some comparisons. I think it's true that some countries and places are blessed with certain natural resources that others may not have, but every place has something unique. So I guess the trick is to harness that and turn on the innovation clock and push the needle. And as you say, financing is key. So I think this is very much the situation in many of the African countries, and this COP I think is talking a lot about that, and the Nordic Development Fund is also part of that solution, but we need to, in our case, use our concessional funding to rope in both public and private financing where it makes the biggest effect. So.
But if you look at the map, the geothermal map of Africa, you have Kenya, you have Ethiopia, Eritrea, you have Rwanda, probably Tanzania as well. So it's
spread, yeah. But you know,
it's quite extensive.
But you are so right. I mean,
and only Kenya are using it to a degree.
We are using it to a degree, but I think when you come to these things, good governance and good policies and good laws are very important.
Yeah.
You can start a good thing, but if it is encumbered by bad governance, then of course you don't achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And second, the one thing that you said which is very important is local and locally owned. I was quoting earlier a statement that Governor Steve Bullock of Montana made when we went there in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for the Association of American Governors meeting. I think it's 2019, and he was the outgoing chairman of the Association of Governors, and he told us, look, you governors are here. You know, you are the people who live with the people at the local level. Count yourselves as very important people, because when somebody's snow is not removed from the street, it's you they come to. When somebody's house is not warmed in Iceland, it's you they come to. And therefore, you discovered a way of using thermal power to give every household energy for heating and other things. And we should do that. I mean, how you did it cost effectively and looking to the future is very important. So models of investment for things like mitigating global warming are important. They don't just happen to be. It's not just a question of saying, let us have this and it happens. How you do it, at what cost, and how is this sustainable over the long run. I think that's extremely important. So I'll be coming to Iceland.
You're welcome.
And then you come to Kisumu.
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
Great, that's already a great outcome of this session. That was exactly what we wanted, this kind of exchange, and I'm glad to see the discussion flowing. So you've been patiently waiting, so let's now turn to our two colleagues which are connected online. And we're going to start with you, Tatiana Gallego Lizon. She's the chief of the Housing and Urban Development Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, with headquarters in Washington, D.C. Ms. Gallego Lizon is an urbanist and engineer with over 20 years' experience in international development. Prior to joining the IDB, she worked at the Asian Development Bank's Southeast Asia Urban Development and Water Division. She has extensive experience in international finance and development, industry and research. She has quite impressive academic credentials. She holds a PhD and a master in engineering by the Imperial College in London, as well as a postgraduate diploma in public policy from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. So, Ms. Gallego, Lizon, I referred before to this exchange between Latin America and the Nordic countries. So 2 years ago, you led a delegation of 17 cities from Latin America and the Caribbean to visit Copenhagen in Denmark and Malmö in Sweden. So if you can share with us some of the lessons or experiences and takeaways from that work and in general and the work you're doing. Thanks.
No, sure, fantastic, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you here today. If you don't mind, I would like to, just start with a little bit of the context before we go on to, how our learning, not just on decarbonization, but also on adaptation, was particularly important, in partnership with NDF and the Nordic countries. So maybe to start with, I would like to mention that, Latin America and the Caribbean countries are just as vulnerable as many other countries around the world in terms of, rising sea levels, natural disasters like hurricanes, which, threaten, the Caribbean on a regular basis and Central America, but also, changes in precipitation patterns, which are, leading to greater droughts these days, changes in the water security cycles. And at the end of the day, this is affecting the people. It's affecting, obviously, our planet, but it's affecting the people. It's affecting its productivity. Just to put a number, and share with our audience, damages caused by climate change have been estimated by some studies to be of the order of 100 billion annually by 2050. This is for Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's very, very significant. And on top, just to put it in context and, thinking about urbanization, as we were mentioning a minute ago, more than 80% of the population of the region lives in cities. There's all these natural disasters which affect us, but in addition to that, cities create, on the one hand, heat cores that intensify the effects of climate change. Some say up to 4 degrees. But in addition, we have, surfaces which, lose their impermeability and cause a greater number of floods. So the way we have designed our cities, we have constructed our cities, is counter to, to adaptation and resilience. At IDB, especially, recently with our Vision 2025, which is our new corporate strategy, we have emphasized and reestablished that sustainability and climate change are basically the core axis of all the work that we do. And for that, within the division, not just our urban division, but in addition to that, we work with transport, we work with energy. We're actively working in solutions, as you were mentioning, related to energy, but also related to land planning and land use, electromobility, construction of, sustainable housing and sustainable buildings, which are, eco-efficient, and also the use of green infrastructures. And NDF has been for a very long time a real true partner. Now, before I go into the details of our trip, which was fantastic, I wanted to highlight maybe the 3 main takings that our team brought back from our visits to Copenhagen and to Malmö, and they were truly amazing. The first one was, that the strategies that the Nordic countries follow are, number 1, people-centered, and number 2, they're at human scale. This means that, we're working basically with the neighborhood, character, and identity. So, these mega cities, that are being created need to take into consideration some of these elements to be able to be adaptable. Secondly, in terms of decarbonization, I think, we learn an awful lot about, transition to green energy, and also the taking an approach to a holistic transit. For that, we looked at solutions, of improved energy efficiency, in the household, but also on city distribution systems. We loved, at that time, learning about decentralized energy generation systems with renewables, but also, with how the households could do so at very localized level. And we were talking about local a second ago, so I think it's really relevant. In addition, we looked at city services, circularity, waste, how, the household by itself can be a clean energy generator, and how it can reduce also the amount of resources that are being used. And we also look at electrification in public transit. And how it had been done progressively, how, for instance, Copenhagen was very different in the 60s. And I think, for many of our mayors, this was a reality check, and the fact that it can be done no matter what. And then also in the areas of decarbonization, the topic of city planning was very, very important. Active mobility, the importance of non-motorized solutions like the bicycle. I mean, we love to hear that 60 to 70% of the city actually moves daily for a variety of needs through, own non-motorized solutions. And in addition to that, the value of public space in what it's a people-centered city. And last but not least, I wanted to say that in adaptation and resiliency, nature-based solutions are, one of the key takings that, our mayors brought from, their visit. Coastal protection, positive water cycles, but also, how all those elements of greenery affect positively health and well-being. And just for our audience, I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but just for our audience, I wanted to mention that NDF was a critical partner, helping us design these 3-day workshop that basically took mayors and city officials from cities in Latin America, but and they have taken it back to their own countries and experimented with it. For instance, on non-motorized transport, the city of Mendoza is now implementing a metropolitan bicycle lane system that will encourage the people in the city to be able to move independently through non-motorized solution. And like that, we have many other cases which are slowly, taking an opportunity to be implemented. I think, it's very important to have these spaces to network. We have a cities network. In fact, they were the true organizers, with NDF of these exchange. And it's important to have these platforms for learning and for be able to exchange, meet, collaborate, and basically bring opportunities from elsewhere. Before closing, however, I didn't want to take, I wanted to, take an extra opportunity to also mention, the great collaboration that NDF did, working with us on, on planning through our Emerging and Sustainable Cities Initiative, which was, a holistic way of, not only building capacity among, planners in our region, building participatory planning, practice, with communities and neighborhoods throughout the country. And in addition to that, generating, some specific projects that allowed us to move forward. Specifically with NDF, we work in 3 major cities, which were Tegucigalpa, Tegucigalpa in Honduras, Cochabamba in Bolivia, and in addition to that, we also worked in Managua in Nicaragua. And last but not least, talking about, active, use of nature-based solutions and active mobility, we have been, NDF and the Nordic countries, with some of the leading, engineering and architecture urbanist, companies in the Nordic countries. We have been designing, for instance, a new metropolitan park, for La Paz and El Alto in Bolivia, which will become the lungs of the city. This is absolutely essential, in creating cities and making sure that they are well adapted and, respond to the needs of the future. Many thanks, and sorry if, I overran a little bit on time.
No, it's good. Thanks a lot for sharing, Ms. Gallego, Lizon. That was really enriching, and it's really nice to see this variety of instruments and tools that can promote this kind of dialogue and I'm sure a lot of the mayors and people that you visited in the Nordic countries are curious to go and see how it's turning out in Mendoza and Tegucigalpa and these other places, and surely there have been some improvements along the way as well, because we always innovate as we go along. So I think, yeah, the things you mentioned, participatory, decarbonizing, nature-based solutions, I think are all key. Thanks for sharing. So now over to you, important, not the least, but very importantly, Astrid Haas from the African Development Bank. Thanks for joining. You are an urban economist, currently working, as I mentioned, for the African Development Bank's Urban and Municipal Development Fund as a long-term consultant. She has wide experience in the area of municipal and infrastructure finance, spanning work across both government and non-governmental organizations across multiple countries, both in Africa and in Asia. She is also a research affiliate at the University of Bergen's Global Research Program on Inequality. In 2020, she received Johns Hopkins University's Outstanding Recent Graduate Award for her work on urbanization. So, Ms. Haas, again, welcome, and if you can please share with us the work that you're doing with the Urban and Municipal Development Fund in partnership with NDF to look into Nordic experiences on urban development that can be perhaps replicated or adapted in the African context.
Thank you very much. Good evening from the other side of Lake Victoria to where Professor Nyong'o is from. I'm speaking to you from Kampala, Uganda, my home city. So I'm going to start my comments, if you agree, by respectfully disagreeing with the mayor of Reykjavik, who started his comments by saying that he is on this panel, but wasn't really sure that he knew anything about the subject. But in fact, he proved in his remarks, aside from knowing the exact GDP of Namibia in 1970 and how that the GDP of Namibia compared to the Icelandic GDP in 1970, he mentioned 3 points as to why this partnership between Nordic cities and African cities is extremely important. The first point he made was that Iceland urbanized faster than any other city in Europe. I didn't know this, but this is really critical because Africa is currently the fastest urbanizing continent in the world. And so I think that already shows where the connections are. He secondly mentioned that, their innovation, they were sitting on these hot springs all along, but their innovation came out of the oil crisis. And Professor Nyong'o in his opening remarks said, when is a better time to find opportunity but in crisis? And that's what we find ourselves in now. Professor Nyong'o mentioned the COVID-19 crisis. I would like to add that this COP26 is also looking at the climate crisis. The third point that the mayor of Reykjavik made, and which is where I think my starting point is this is an incredible opportunity. Urbanization is often framed as a challenge, but actually it's an opportunity. There's not a single country in the world that is developed today that has done so without urbanizing. So how do we unlock that opportunity in Africa? And I think we have a lot to learn from Nordic countries. So following the very successful model that Tatiana just outlined of the Emerging and Sustainable Cities program at the Inter-American Development Bank, the African Development Bank, through support from the Nordic Development Fund, launched its own Urban and Municipal Development Fund in 2019 and its own African Cities program. Within this program, we're looking at bridging and incorporating learnings from the Nordic urban development model. And we're doing this within the sort of 3 prongs that outline the strategic thrust of our program. So the first one is improving urban diagnostics and planning. We heard Professor Nyong'o mention that planning our cities, the cities that exist today, often settlement has happened before planning, which has made it very expensive, but we have now to look at how we plan before settlement. And so to take one example that was mentioned in the outset, which is transportation, for the majority of the cities across the continent, transportation is central to urban planning. And I read this interesting statistic today, I think that came from C40 Cities, that says public transportation must double by 2030 so that we can meet our 1.5 degree emission targets. Yet cities like my own Kampala, which has about 1.5 million people in resident and then about 2 million commuters every day, doesn't have a public transportation system. So you can imagine how much traffic we sit in on a daily basis and a growing amount every day. And so what is happening is without public transportation, there's a proliferation in the rise of low capacity and carbon inefficient vehicles, namely cars. So for cities like Kampala, the major challenge is how do we retrofit this infrastructure given people have already settled? But I think the major opportunity, Professor Nyong'o mentioned it, most of cities are yet still to come. It's estimated that 2/3 of African cities are yet to be built. So we can do it right from the outset if we do it well. And this is where I think we have a lot of learning from the Nordic model. Tatiana mentioned electrification of vehicles. In Uganda, we've built the first electric buses. So, we're starting to leapfrog models. However, I think the most important learning I take as a pedestrian who has already once upon a time in my life fallen in an uncovered manhole in Kampala is that we need to actually center our thinking around transportation, around mobility, and around non-motorized transportation options. And I think that's what Nordic cities have done very well. The second area of the Urban and Municipal Development Fund is around upstream identification and preparation of climate smart infrastructure projects. And there's many ways that we're approaching this, but I think one of the most exciting that we have to date is a partnership with C40 Cities that has launched a Chief Financial Officers Network for CFOs across the continent. And one of the reasons we did this is that there is survey data from 292 cities across the world that showed if we really want to invest and we really want to make sure that climate smart infrastructure happens, we need to bridge the gap between the people who have the finance and the people who have the ideas, which is not usually the same people in a city structure. And so we're really trying to do this within the UMDF and through partnership with C40 Cities to be able to really help cities create climate smart bankable projects by bringing all the key stakeholders, including the chief financial officers on board. And through this partnership with C40 Cities, it has offshoot benefits because a lot of Nordic cities are also C40 Cities. And we have, for example, launched discussions with the city of Oulu on how you can do, for example, climate budgeting and how we can learn from them as well. The third and final area of the UMDF's focus is around, and this is my favorite topic, municipal finance and municipal fiscal health. And I'm not going to start on this because this is the topic I could talk about quite a lot, but I think here I just want to bring out one learning that we're currently taking, which is, aside from supporting cities themselves, we want to be able to bring up the capacity of subnational institutions that we can support. And here there's an incredibly great model of the Common Invest in Sweden, which is one that we're looking at, that acts as an intermediary between a lot of small cities and helps, therefore, address the high costs that cities have by borrowing on capital markets, as well as helping pool infrastructure projects. So just to finalize, as you can see, very enthusiastic about the learnings that can happen, but I think the main aspect of the Nordic urbanization model that the countries like my own in Africa and cities like my own, like Kampala, really need to learn from is what Tatiana mentioned they took away from their trip. And I should add that we hope post COVID that we're able to do a similar trip with African mayors. And that is that the city is only as good as the people who live in it. And so putting livability at the front and center of cities and making sure that there's sustainability in the environment the cities encompass is, I think, the main message that we want to take from the Nordic development model and learn from for our African cities.
Very good.
Great, thank you, Ms. Haas. Again, great to hear the dialogue and the sharing of experiences in different ways. And I like the way you mentioned the leapfrogging, that we can skip some of the hurdles and problems that in other places that we faced and try to make even better solutions as we get. And yeah, I think really the part about financing is also important. I mean, the mayor from Iceland also mentioned, electricity distribution. There are a lot of things that sort of the idea starts, but then there are certain factors that make initiatives flow, and one of them is financing, both getting financing for infrastructure and things, but also getting the municipal finances working, and then getting certain things to a certain scale, like this geothermal thing that was an idea first and then spread. So I think these are great ideas. So now that we've heard from the four speakers, both from city representatives from Iceland and from Kenya, and from two multilateral development banks working to strengthen and support cities in Africa and Latin America to develop innovative and new solutions. I want to open up the floor to the audience here in Glasgow to see if there's any questions that you want to ask either of the two representatives here or anybody online. And if you can ask the question, try to be as brief as possible and maybe direct the question to one of the panelists. So, yes.
I think I was very interested to hear about, first of all, amazing panel, thank you. And the level of excitement is also contagious. And that's lovely. Thank you. What I wanted to know was that I think, Mayor, you mentioned patient financing that enabled you to look at geothermal in the context of Iceland. And how can we learn from those models and what facilitated that financing so that we can do the same in Kenya? Because the issue is the chicken and egg. Nobody wants to look at geothermal. And there is always a risk premium to looking at Africa. We don't even have the longest financing. So can you figure out, can you give us some ideas about how we can replicate this patient capital model? Thank you.
Thanks. I think let's answer that question, and then we can come. So,
Yeah.
please,
I don't know if I have all the answers. One kind of historical anecdote that I don't know if Icelanders are that aware of is that Icelanders were shameless of kind of applying for everything as a developing country up till 1975 or something. Both through the Marshall grants after the Second World War, but also through UN institutions, although the GDP already then was stronger. We could maybe organize more trips of international financial institutions to Iceland to just see it and believe in it and kind of get the idea. But I also think that we have to believe in cities, and we have to believe in local communities, and we have to trust them to, to take care of their own infrastructure and get the necessary revenue from the population and kind of build trust. But at some point, it has to be a leap of faith, But I think that time has come, and I think the urgency from climate issues, the urgency of urbanization, but also the opportunities maybe in both fields for Africa could be that moment.
But I think there's also a problem we have. The tyranny of impossibility. You begin planning, and the tyranny of impossibility makes it difficult for you to make choices. And remember, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere once said, to plan is to choose. If you really have chosen that you are going to rely on geothermal power, you have chosen. Don't let the fear of impossibility or the tyranny of impossibility take you away from that. In the case of Kenya, for example, I was chairman of the Public Investment Committee in Parliament in 1994, when we were debating this independent power producer thing. And my committee refused it. But the government went ahead and implemented it. Look at the result now. At that point in time, it had again gone headlong. And geothermal was already known as an alternative source of power to independent power producers. But the fear of impossibility, the failure to choose.
Great, thank you. I think I saw one more hand, yeah?
My name is Isifu Suleiman. I should go on. Yes, I'm a Ghanaian, and I'm coming from northern Ghana. I'm actually a rural person. I'm a farmer. But I have to tell you that this is very important, and I would have wished that some of our city mayors were here to listen. Now, why am I saying so? I chose to be in the rural area because I never liked to live in Accra and our major cities. And I'm seeing all these problems. I have two questions for Professor and then also the expert from Uganda. The question is, given the nature of our cities, but per practical experience, I hate to live in the city because one time it took me almost 5 hours leaving the city back to my village, Walwale. Before I could leave the city, it took us 5 hours because of traffic. Now, The question is, currently as we stand now, we've already built our cities and made it choke. Here is the case. I came here and saw a typical city plan. And I would have wished if I was, what's the name? Somebody from here, I would have lived in the city. I wouldn't live in the rural area because of the nature of the planning. With this frustration, and we are talking, how can we change? Is it possible? I am thinking that probably it's too late. If it is not too late, how can we do it? Number two, we are looking at the behavior of ourselves. Where I come from, if I put my structure here, you come here and said, you come and tell me that, oh, we are planning the city A, B, C, D, I think we won't take it easy. Coupled with the nature of our politics, the politician wants to win power, and for that matter, he wouldn't dare pull down my structure because I will not vote for him. So combined with all these factors, Professor and you, I am happy you are here. Can you tell me that it's possible? And if it's possible, how can it be done? Otherwise, as I stand now, I think it is not possible. We are just doing talking, and it is never going to work unless you are able to convince me from your point of view that it's possible. And then one day I can live in the city. Otherwise, I will remain in my rural area throughout my life. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective, Professor.
That is what is called a refusenik. Look, that's what I said. If you fear that you cannot change, you will stay where you are. But let me ask you a question. Supposing if we leave the cities that they were, I live in a place called Runda, and next to us is a slum called Gidogoro, and we have not done anything about it. Supposing a fire breaks down in the Gidogoro, and that fire covers the whole of Runda, then we shall realize that it was important to have done something about Gidogoro when we are suffering the consequences. Now, we have been postponing solving these problems. A day will come when we have to solve them at a much higher price than today. I'll give you an example. There is a long highway in Nairobi called Wayaki Way, which turns into Embakasi Road, or Airport Road. Now, up to recently, it could take you 3 hours to get to the airport from downtown Nairobi. I once missed my flight, having been at the road for 3 hours. At the moment, the government is building what you call the skyscraper road, a road that overflies the whole Uhuru Wayaki Way and Uhuru Highway and Airport Road up to the airport, which means it will take you about 10 or 15 minutes to get there. But we have paid for it. Supposing we have planned for it 30 years ago, when the greater metropolitan Nairobi plan was done, we would be paying less today. But because of the fear of impossibility, the reluctance to make choices, that's why we say the city is unlivable. But the city is not by nature unlivable. The negligence of planning, respecting green space, making sure that we don't live with slum as if a slum is an inevitable part of a city, that poverty must be there to be studied. We are where we are. But we must now make choices and change it.
Thank you, Ms. Haas. If you can answer a bit briefly, and then just make sure we have some time at the end to get back to all of the four of you for some takeaways. But Ms. Haas, yeah.
So yes, it can be done. If it's going to be done right, it needs to be done now. I can only echo the planning in advance of settlement. I think there's actually data from Latin America that shows that retrofitting it, like we're doing now with the Kampalas of this world, can be up to 30% more expensive, a third more expensive, but not even talking about the political and social costs of moving people, as you mentioned, and moving a house. However, what we often focus these conversations on the Accras and the Kampalas and the Nairobis of this world, but actually the cities that are growing the fastest are the ones that are not even existing as cities yet. So we can plan those, and we are. So in Uganda, we just named 10 new cities, and actually they're doing work where they're just delineating where the roads are going to be. And they say, okay, build your house here. One day there's going to be a road here, kind of what the professor was just saying. If they'd planned for, and I know Wayaki Way very well, if they planned for that before, it would have cost them less. That's what they're doing now, and we can do it. And the final point I want to make is that it doesn't mean that everyone has to live in cities, right? People should have a choice. And if you want to live in your rural area, you can live in your rural area. But well-planned, well-managed urbanization will benefit you, the people in the city, you in the rural area, your country, your region, and the world ultimately.
Great, thank you. So thanks for all these great comments and questions and remarks. I'm just going to say maybe 1 minute of some takeaways from my end, and then I'll get back to each one of you to say one actionable sort of statement that you're going to move forward in the next year or so in terms of green and livable cities. But I've taken a lot of interesting notes. I think trust was mentioned. I think that's really important to build up the trust, and also especially if you want to get revenues to sustain a lot of these services, you need to build that trust. Participation, building partnership across both with citizens but civil society, taking opportunities out of crises and really using that to catalyze innovation and harnessing change. And I think planning was something that really came out to avoid future costs and losses. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but I think having a vision and good leaders like yourselves coupled with opportunities to engage, and we learn by looking at others and sharing experiences. So I think that's been really nice to have both IDB and AFDB participating today as well. So we have a few minutes. As promised, I was going to go back to each one of you, and if you can just say more or less like almost like a hashtag, but maybe a little bit longer, like a phrase of something that you've taken away from this and something that you will bring back to your work now that you will promote green and livable cities. So you haven't spoken for a while, Ms. Gallego, Lizon, so what's your statement? Yeah.
Okay, from my side, maybe also, building on the comments from earlier, and I would say obviously that, as my colleagues were saying, don't be afraid, but don't be afraid either to retrofit and to change. Cities are living. Cities belong to their citizens. So you also have to plan to retrofit. That's one of the things that we're bringing from Latin America, where the population is already consolidated, but it's also something that we learn in the Nordic countries, how the cities actually moved and changed and adapted with their people. So in the same way that it's wonderful to plan ahead, also don't be afraid to retrofit.
Thank you. Ms. Haas?
So aside from doing a lot more research on Reykjavik and particularly its patient capital model, which I'm really now very interested in, I think really my takeaway is when it comes to Nordic cities and the piece that I will continue to echo as I work with mayors and city managers across the continent and CFOs through the CFO network, is putting people and the environment at the center of urban life. And when we think about what we're going to plan and what we're planning for, it's not an abstract. It's about the person and it's about the environment.
Great, thank you. Maybe, Professor?
I like what she said, the two of them, that don't be afraid to retrofit. When you retrofit, it leads to some waste. You destroy buildings, roofs come down, and you think you're wasting some things, but waste is actually wealth. You can turn that waste into new wealth. I've seen people from the informal sector going to sites where houses are being brought down, and they will take everything with them, including the stones. They're not taking them because they're doing you a good turn, they're taking them because they're turning that into wealth. So if you retrofit with the idea of turning what you think is waste is wealth, you are actually being pounds wise and penny foolish, like the British say, penny wise and pounds foolish. You are doing the other way around. You're being pounds wise and penny foolish.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I felt a bit awkward to comment on something I didn't know very much about, but maybe one of the takeaways is that we remember how kind of our own history and how short the history from kind of poverty and even absolute poverty to wealth is, and that's history not for a part of the world but all of the world, and that we remember that we can change things, that cities are man-made, both the problems but also their solutions, and we have solutions all over the world. I mean, we are implementing a bus rapid transit system in Reykjavik. It's an idea born in Bogota and pioneered in Africa all over. And it's so interesting that you have found 10 new cities to implement public transport in Uganda alone. But one thing that I failed to mention that is as a part of maybe the story of Iceland, kind of in the 20th century, and a very important part is to remember kind of all of the assets, all of the people. I'm talking about equality. I'm talking about women, both giving women power and remembering kind of that half of humankind as a part of the kind of knowledge and workforce and economy. That is a very large part of Iceland's economic history too, that we're all at it. It's the highest working attendance of both genders in the world.
Thank you. Fantastic, Mr. Mayor. That was really good to bring the gender perspective into the equation, which we fully agree at the Nordic Development Fund. That's one of our key priorities, to promote gender in our work on climate and building resilient society. So really thanks a lot to the panelists and to all the participants. And on behalf of the Nordic Development Fund, I hope you've enjoyed the session and learned as much as I have. Thank you.
Thank you.